Thomas Taylor, his dissertation on Aristotle's philosophy. We're in Book 2, Chapter 7, and we've looked at the causes of gravity and levity, which in one respect was earth and fire itself, insofar as earth is the cause of gravity to water. But then, of course, the ultimate cause is the natural place of those things being part of their proper form. So things move to the actualization of their potential, and locomotion is the last of the generations closest to the perfection of its form. One thought was like that's why even the younger gods in Plato's terminology, or the planets, celestial bodies, which Aristotle also recognizes as divine, even they participate in locomotion because it's not a deviation from their essential nature, just their activity. But it's still, being in their proper place is part of their proper form. I suppose also for the celestial bodies, that locomotion is never, strictly speaking, a deviation from their proper place, because their place is like one point on the circle of their orbit is sort of the center of where they ought to be, which is in their orbit. But he didn't mention that specifically. So, chapter 7. The next dogma that particularly demands our attention is the perpetuity of generation and its being circularly infinite. This Aristotle demonstrates as follows in the second book of his treatise on generation corruption. Again, Aristotle. Since it has been demonstrated that the motion according to lation, or local motion, is perpetual, it is necessary, these things existing, that generation also should have a continual existence, for lation produces generation incessantly, in consequence of introducing and removing that which is generative. At the same time, also, it is evident that what was before observed was well said, viz., that lation and not generation is the first of mutations. For it is much more reasonable that being should be the cause of generation to non-being. I thought he said it was the last of the motions previously. Um, I mean, it's the noblest in that it doesn't involve a deviation from the thing's essential form. I could have sworn he characterized it as the last of the motions, so maybe this is meant in some different respect here. So where's that footnote? I see. Okay, so that what was before observed was well said, viz. That lation and not generation is the first of mutations, for it is much more reasonable. He must mean first in terms of value and not chronology, because obviously he said before, like something is generated and alters and grows, attains health, and then it moves. It's like the last. I swear he did say last. So here he means like principal mutation, morally, I guess. For it is much more reasonable that being should be the cause of generation to non-being than that non-being should be the cause of existence to being. That, therefore, which is born along has an existence, but that which is in generation or becoming to be is not. Hence, also, lation is prior to generation. All right, footnote 2. Aristotle, supposing the doctrine to be admitted which he has delivered about causes in common in the second book of his Physics, and the particular doctrine which he had delivered about matter, and the form of generable natures, supposing also the demonstration given in the eighth book of the Physics to be admitted, that the circular motion of the heaven is perpetual, asserts in the first place that the continued and perpetual motion of the heavenly is the cause of the perpetuity of generation and corruption in the sublunary region. Okay, so local motion is, he's talking globally, not within one thing. So with one thing, the local motion may be the last of the motions it undergoes, because first it completes itself, then it moves. But here he's talking about in the cosmos, so local motion is always going to precede any given generation, and since some of the bodies which move locally are ungenerated because they've existed from all time. Therefore, local motion is prior to generation. And the circular motion of the heaven is perpetual, asserts in the first place that the continued and perpetual motion of the heavenly is the cause of the perpetuity of generation and corruption in the sublunary region. Okay. For the generative nature, which by its access causes generation, by its recess causes corruption. But the perpetual motion of the heaven is the cause that the sun, who is the universal generator of inferior natures, perpetually accedes and recedes. The perpetual motion of the heaven, okay, interesting connection. So specifically, it's the local motion of the sun that produces generation and corruption. Corruption in the sense that like an object causes its shadow, not that it causes it, strictly speaking, but the perpetual motion of the heaven, yeah, the perpetual motion of the heaven, therefore, is the cause that generation and corruption are perpetual in the sublunary region. The truth of this will be confirmed by considering that the first mutation is the cause of other mutations, but the circular motion of the heaven is, as is demonstrated in the 8th book, let me try that again. But the circular motion of the heaven, as is demonstrated in the 8th book of the Physics, and not generation, is the first mutation. Okay. The circular motion of the heaven, therefore, is the cause of generation and corruption. It is also much more reasonable that a thing which exists should be the cause of generation to that which does not exist, than that a thing which is not should be the cause of generation to that which is. But that which is locally moved, while it is locally moved, exists. That, however, which is in generation, or becoming to be, while it is becoming to be, is not. Hence it is reasonable that the heaven, while it is locally moved, should be the cause of generation, and therefore local motion is prior to generation. Since, however, it is supposed, and has been demonstrated, that generation and corruption are in continuity with things, but we say that lation is the cause of generation, it is evident that from the existence of one lation, it will not happen that both will be produced, because they are contrary. I'm actually going to read that again. It's a little confusing. Since, however, it is supposed and has been demonstrated that generation and corruption are in continuity with things, but we say that lation is the cause of generation, it is evident that from the existence of one lation, it will not happen that both will be produced because they are contrary. Okay, so one cause produces one effect. It won't produce both generation and corruption. Okay, so one type of motion will produce either generation or corruption, I guess. For the same thing, and which always subsists after the same manner, is naturally adapted to produce the same thing, so that either generation or corruption will always exist. But it is necessary that there should be motions which are many and contrary, either in lation or in inequality, for the causes of contraries are contrary. Hence, okay. So because if there was just one type of local motion, it would be either everything is generation always or everything is corruption always. We need contrary types of motion to act as contrary principles of the contrary types of either generation or corruption. Hence, the first lation is not the cause of generation and corruption, but that which subsists according to the oblique circle, i.e. the zodiac. For in this motion, the continued is one, and it has the property of being moved according to two motions. So the first lation, motion in a straight line, can't be the cause, so instead it's the oblique. Interesting, he calls it an oblique circle, recognizing that already. For in this motion, the continued is one, and it has the property of being moved according to two motions. For it is necessary, if generation and corruption will always be continued, something will always be moved, in order that the mutations themselves may not fail. But two motions are necessary, in order that one of these alone may not happen to exist. Lation, therefore, is the cause of the continuance of the whole, but the obliquity of the zodiac is the cause of acceding and receding. Okay, so motion can be the cause of the generation corruption cycle, the existence of that whole, but it is specifically the obliquity of the motion of the zodiac, which is the cause of the acceding and receding, for it happens that at one time the sun and planets become remote from, and at another near to us. But the interval being unequal, the motion will be anomalous. Hence, if the sun by approaching and being near generates anything, in departing and becoming remote, he will corrupt that thing. And if by frequently acceding he generates, by frequently departing, he will also be the cause of corruption. For of contraries, the causes are contrary. Footnote 3. Through the circular motion of the primum mobile, first mover, or first moved, probably not first mover. Alright, so though the circular motion of the primum mobile is the cause of the perpetuity of generation and corruptions in the sublunary region, yet the cause on account of which generation and corruption alternately succeed each other is not the direct motion of the first moved, but the oblique motion of the zodiac. For generations and corruptions so succeed each other that there is one time of generation and another of corruption. If, however, that which generates through motions always possesses an invariable sameness of subsistence, there could not be one time of generation and another of corruption. It is necessary, therefore, that what generates through motion should not possess an invariable sameness of subsistence, but through the direct motion of the first moved, the sun, who is the universal generator, would always possess as sameness of subsistence. The sun can be the same, and yet the motion contains contraries in some respect. Hence it is necessary that beside the motion of the first moved, there should be another motion by which the sun may subsist variously, not indeed that he may be moved with a contrary motion, since a circular motion has not properly a contrary, but that he may be moved obliquely, so as that sometimes approaching to us, he may regard us with rays less oblique, and at another time, when departing from us, his rays may shine upon us more obliquely. Hence, as in order to the perpetuity of generation, a continued and perpetual motion is requisite, so too the vicissitude of generations and corruptions, it is requisite that there should be two motions, the one direct, the other oblique, which is the motion of the planets through the zodiac. The continuity, therefore, and perpetuity of motion is the cause that generations are continued and perpetual. The obliquity of the zodiac is the cause that the sun and the other planets that are moving through the zodiac sometimes approach to and sometimes recede from us. And the access and recess of the sun is the cause of generation and corruption. For that which he generates by his access, he corrupts by his recess. Because, however, the sun frequently accedes and recedes, he frequently generates and frequently corrupts. I'm just liking the vocabulary there I've never really made the connection. Access, recess, accede, recede. Okay. The corruption and generation, Aristotle, also, which is according to nature, are in equal time. Hence also the time and the life of everything have number, and are distinguished and bounded by this. For of all things there is order, and every time and life are measured by a period. except that all are not measured by the same period, but some things by a less and others by a greater. For to some things a year, to others a greater, and to others a less period is the measure. All right. Footnote 4. From what has been above said, it follows in the first place that because the time in which the sun accedes is equal to the time in which he recedes, therefore the time of generations is equal to the time of corruptions. In the second place, it follows that the time of duration and life of all things are measured by the number of the celestial motions according to the order of the universe, but all time is measured by the circulation of a celestial body, though things do not endure for an equal time, but some more and others less. For some things endure for a year, and therefore are measured by one circuit of the sun through the zodiac. Others endure for a shorter time, and therefore are measured by a less circuit, as by the circuit of the moon if they endure for 1 month, or any number of months within a year, or by the circuit of the prime moved, or first moved, if they endure for 1 day, or any number of days within a month. So the heavens is the first thing that's moved. Primo mobile. Sensible perception also appears to accord with what we have asserted. Aristotle. For we see that when the sun approaches, there is generation, but when he departs, corruption. Each of these two takes place in an equal time, for the time is equal of generation and corruption. It frequently, however, happens that things are corrupted in a less time on account of their mixture with each other. Okay, so it's not simply the motions of the celestial bodies, but sometimes mixture is a cause of corruption. On account of their mixture with each other, for matter, being anomalous and not everywhere the same, it is also necessary that generations should be anomalous, and that some should be swifter but others slower. Okay. Hence it will happen that through the generation of these, other things will be corrupted. But as we have said, generation and corruption will always be continual and will never fail, through the cause which we have assigned. But this reasonably happens. Okay, so matter being anomalous, because things are material, things won't be perfectly according to the heavenly bodies. It's like he could have gone somewhere in a line of reasoning with the mixture account of the anomalies, but the material account of anomalies kind of chalks it up to a first principle, and then the possible, if I feel like a possible line of argument is dropped here. It is also necessary that generation should be anomalous, and that some should be swifter, but others slower. Hence will happen that through the generation of these, other things will be corrupted. But as we have said, generation and corruption will always be continual and will never fail, through the cause which we have assigned. But this reasonably happens. For since in all things we say that nature always aspires after that which is better, but it is better to be than not to be, and in how many ways to be is predicated has been shown by us elsewhere in the categories. But it is impossible that this should be the case in all things, on account of being far distant from their principle. Okay, so it's not possible that all things should always be, because they're distant from their principle of being or generation. Hence, in that way which remains, divinity gives completion to the whole of things, viz., by making generation to be unceasing. Okay, so basically the same line from the symposium, that it's like everything seeks after a perpetuity of being, but that being impossible, we go for an image of it in generation. That's like the subjective reference frame, whereas here he's talking providentially on the whole. Generation and corruption is like perpetual generation and corruption is the second best to everlasting perpetuity. But it makes sense that we should have a complete cosmos, which has the higher as well as the lower. For thus especially will existence be continual, because for generation to be always passing into existence is most near to essence. But the cause of this, as has been frequently said, is the lation in a circle, for this alone is continual. Hence, such other things as change into each other, according to passive qualities and powers, such for instance as simple bodies, imitate the lation in a circle. For when air is generated from water, and fire from air, and again water from fire, we say that generation has made a circular progression in consequence of returning to that whence it began. Hence also, the right-line lation of these, imitating the lation in a circle, is continual. Footnote 5. The generation of the elements are so affected that air is produced from water and fire from air, and again water from fire. Hence matter returns to the form of water, whence it began to be moved, and therefore the generation of the elements imitates a circular motion. The rectilinear motion of the elements also imitates a circular motion. For in the summer, when the sun approaches to us, the inferior are changed into the superior elements, viz. Into vapors and exhalations, and are moved upward. But in winter, the superior are changed into the inferior elements, and being restored into rain, or resolved into rain, are returned to the downward place. Okay. At the same time, too, from these things, that which is doubled by some is evident, doubted. From these things, that which is doubted by some is evident. Why, since every body tends to its proper place, composite bodies are not in an infinite time separated from each other, for the cause of this is their mutation into each other. For if each of them remained in its own region, and was not changed by the element which is near it, they would already have been divulsed. They change, therefore, on account of a twofold lation, but in consequence of changing, no one of them can remain in any arranged place. That generation, therefore, and corruption exist, and on account of what cause, and what the generable is, and also the corruptible, is evident from what has been said. And that twofold lation, that's why we had the footnote connecting it to the motion of the seasons. The seasons lead to a rising up sometimes and a condensation down sometimes, and so the seasons and the obliquity of the zodiac stir up the elements. Okay. It is, however, necessary there should be something which moves in order to the existence of motion, as has been before elsewhere observed, and if motion is perpetual, it is necessary there should be something which perpetually moves. In like manner, if motion is continual, that which first moves is one, immovable, ingenerable, and unchanged in quality. And if there are many circular motions, it is necessary there should be many movers indeed, but all of them in a certain respect under one principle. Okay. But time being continued, it is also necessary that motion should be continued, since it is impossible for time to exist without motion. Time, therefore, will be the number of some continued motion, hence it will be the number of circular motion, as has been shown in the discussions in the beginning. But whether is motion continued from that which is moved being continued, or from that in which it is moved? I say, for instance, the place or the passive quality. It is evident, however, that it is from that which is moved being continued. So the thing being moved, not from the place continuing. Motion is continuous because the thing being moved is continuous, not its place. Okay, for how is passive quality continued except from the thing to which it is accident being continued? Because the passive quality of being moved depends on the moved thing. But if it is continued from that in which it is moved, this can alone be inherent in place, for it possesses a certain magnitude. Of the motion in place, however, that alone which is circular is continued, of the motion in place, however, that alone which is circular is continued, so that itself is always continued with itself. This, therefore, is that which makes motion to be continued, viz. The body which is moved in a circle. But motion makes time to be continued and perpetual. Okay. So time is dependent on the definition of motion. So motion causes the perpetuity of time. Perpetuity of motion causes the time. This, therefore, is that which makes motion to be continued, viz. The body which is moved in a circle. And the continued movement of the body moving in a circle makes perpetuity of motion, because the motion is dependent on the body which moves, not on the place. So basically, the continued existence of the heavenly bodies is kind of the first principle here. And if the heavenly bodies are divine, then that seems, appropriately pious. 6. The celestial motion is continued because a celestial body is continued and circular. For a celestial body is not in place except from accident, and therefore the celestial motion cannot have its continuity from place, but from the body alone which is moved. So it's not like the area of motion of the heavens, not like sort of the fixed sphere itself, but the stars, the bodies that are driving the perpetual motion. And therefore the celestial motion cannot have its continuity from place, but from the body alone which is moved. For motion has not continuity except from a subject, for since quality or accident cannot be continued except because the subject to which it is an accident is continued, thus also aliation, which is a motion in quality, is continued on account of the subject. Hence local motion can alone have continuity from that in which it is, not the place but the body. All local motion, however, cannot be continued and perpetual, but circular motion alone. Circular motion, therefore, is continued and perpetual on account of a circular body, but time is continued and perpetual on account of circular motion. So you got the circular body of the heavenly spheres, and then circular motion, and then the time of that circular motion. Since, however, in things which are continually moved according to generation, or change in quality, or in short, mutation, since, however, in things which are continually moved according to generation, or change in quality, or in short, mutation, we see that which exists in a consequent order, and this thing generated after that, so as not to fail, it must be considered whether there is anything which will exist from necessity, or nothing, but it may happen that all things may not be generated. Well, this is finally a, genuine, interesting question. Okay, let me read this question again more carefully. Since, however, in things which are continually moved according to generation, or change in quality, or in short mutation, we see that which exists in a consequent order, and this thing generated after that so as not to fail. Okay, since we see generated things succeeding one another, it may be asked, is it possible that nothing exists, or from necessity it must be? Well, he'll probably explain this from the heavenly spheres, which is not as good, I guess, as the teleological explanation for it that Plato or Neoplatonists would give, but we'll see what Aristotle does here. For that this may be the case with some things is evident, and immediately the will be, and that which is about to be another thing are on this account. For in order to say truly that a thing will be, it is necessary that it should be some time or other true that it is, but nothing hinders that a thing of which it is now true to say that it is about to be may not be generated, for he who is about to walk may not walk. In short, since it happens that some things may be and may not be, it is evident that generated natures will thus subsist, and this will not be from necessity. Whether, therefore, are all, so any particular generated nature seems to be not necessary because it's generated. Whether, therefore, are all things thus circumstanced or not. But it is necessary that some things should be simply generated, and as it is with respect to existence, that it is impossible for some things, but possible for others not to be, thus also it is with respect to generation. Hence, it is necessary that conversions, as it were, should be produced, and that it is not possible that this should not happen. Okay, so it's not clear which things he's saying are necessary. It seems clear that he's going to argue that, on the whole, generation corruption are necessary, but are certain things necessary which are generated and certain things unnecessary or contingent which are generated? That I don't think has been firmly established. If, therefore, that which is prior must necessarily have been generated, if that which is posterior will be, for instance, if a house will be built, it is necessary that the foundation should have been previously laid, and if this, that prior to it, there should have been clay. If this be the case, will it also be necessary, if the foundation is made, that the house should be built, or will it no longer be necessary, unless it is simply necessary that the foundation should be laid? If this be the case, will it also be necessary, if the foundation is made, that the house should be built, or will it no longer be necessary, unless it is simply necessary that the foundation should be? I don't know why this is so difficult to follow for me here. Okay, so the clay being there, will it also be necessary, if the foundation is made, that the house should be built? Or will it no longer be necessary, unless it is simply necessary that the foundation should be laid? Okay. So if the house is going to be built, it's necessary that the foundation should be laid, but if the foundation is laid, is it necessary that the house should be built? No. But if this be admitted, it is also necessary that the foundation being laid, the house should be built, for thus the prior subsists with reference to the posterior, so that if the latter will be, it is necessary that the former should have a prior subsistence. So he's saying the foundation will be necessary if the house will be built. Okay. Yeah. So if we are saying the house will be built, we're saying the foundation has been laid, and if it will be built, it's necessary that the house will be built. If, therefore, it is necessary that the latter, the house be built. So if it is necessary that the house be built, it is also necessary that the former should be generated. And if the former, it is also necessary that the latter should be generated. Yet not on account of that, but because it was supposed that it would be from necessity. Okay, if we're going to say the house is going to be built, then the former, but if we're saying the house is going to be built and the former, then the latter. In those things, therefore, in which it is necessary that the posterior should be, in these conversion takes place, and always when the prior is generated, it is necessary that the posterior should be generated. Okay, so when a posterior state is necessitated and the prior conditions are met, then it is necessary that the generation take place, which brings about the posterior. So that's when things in generation are necessary. An example would be good. I mean, the house example was only necessary by supposition, whereas it'd be good to see something that's naturally necessary like that. Footnote 7. All beings have not a necessary subsistence, but some things exist in such a manner as that they may not exist, and these latter are so generated that they may not be generated. Hence, all beings are not necessarily generated, but some are so generated that they might not be generated. Aristotle, therefore, inquires whether all things which are made contingently, so that they might not be made, or whether some things are so made that simply they cannot be made. Oh, wait. That simply they cannot not be made. Okay. So some things are contingent, but are all things contingent, or some things cannot not be made that are generated? Therefore, whether as some things so exist that they may not exist, and other things so exist that they cannot not exist, so some things are made and generated in such a manner that they may not be generated, but others are so made and generated that they cannot not be generated, and therefore a conversion is given between things prior and posterior, so that as if the posterior is made, it is necessary that the prior should be made, for if the prior is made, it is also necessary that the posterior should be made. So that's the conversion. So necessary things, there's a conversion between prior and posterior. Prior implies posterior, posterior implies prior when it's necessary. Well, posterior implies prior always, but when it's necessary, prior implies posterior. Thus, for instance, as if a house is built, it is necessary that the foundation should be laid. So if the foundation is laid, it is necessary that the house should be built. So this is the case in question to illustrate it. In answer to this question, it must be observed that in order to the subsistence of conversion, it is not sufficient that if the posterior exists, it is necessary the prior should exist. That's always the case. But if it is further requisite that the posterior should be absolutely and simply necessary, so as that it cannot not be admitted. Thus, in order that conversion may subsist, it is not sufficient that if the house is, it is necessary the foundation should be laid, but it is further requisite that it should be simply and absolutely necessary that the house is. Okay, so from prior, posterior is necessary. So far, we have only when the posterior is in itself necessary. For then, it will not only be necessary that if the house is, the foundation should be laid, but also that if the foundation is, the existence of the house must be necessarily admitted, since it is absolutely necessary that the house should exist. Hence, in this case, the prior existing, it is necessary that the posterior should be generated, since the posterior is absolutely necessary. But when the posterior is not absolutely necessary, it is not always necessary that the prior existing, the posterior, should be generated. Okay, so the necessity basically stems from the posterior. I think that's poor reasoning, and hopefully we get better reasoning. In those, Aristotle, in those things, therefore, in which it is necessary that the posterior should be, in these, conversion takes place. So when the posterior is necessary, then prior and posterior mutually entail. Hence, if generations proceed infinitely downward, it would not be necessary that this which is posterior should be simply generated. Okay. So, hence, if generations proceeded infinitely downward. Oh, okay. So he's going to make an argument for the circularity of time, the eternal cyclicity of time. Possibly. Okay. So if generations proceed infinitely downward, by that I'm taking him to mean that prior leads to posterior, to posterior, to posterior, and there's no cycle. Rotten mouse, yes, it's actually live. Hence, if generations proceeded infinitely downward, it would not be necessary that this which is posterior should be simply generated. Neither would it be necessary from hypothesis, for there will always be another thing before it from necessity, on which account that also must necessarily have been generated. Hence, if there is not a beginning of the infinite, neither will there be any first thing, on account of which it will be necessary that a thing should be generated. Okay, so I was taking him to mean the opposite, that if generation continued infinitely, then there wouldn't be any necessary posterior condition, but what he's saying is going backwards. If there were always prior conditions ad infinitum, then there wouldn't be one necessary first condition. Moreover, neither in things which have an end will it be true to assert this, that it is simply necessary a thing should be generated, as for instance a house, when the foundation is laid. Okay, Rotten Mouse is asking what we're talking about. The topic here is the cyclical generation of the cosmos. So Aristotle, of course, believes in the eternity of the world, and here it seems like he's setting the stage for an argument why generation must cycle, ultimately. Let's back up a little bit. Okay. Actually, a little bit more. So, hence, if generations proceed infinitely downward, as in Tower of Turtles, like the causes continue back infinitely, it would not be necessary that this which is posterior should be simply generated. Neither would it be necessary from hypothesis, for there will always be another thing before it from necessity. So by necessity, there will always be things which precede the thing in question, on which account that also must necessarily have been generated. Yet there's always another and another, ex hypothesi. Hence, if there is not a beginning of the infinite, neither will there be any first thing, on account of which it will be necessary that a thing should be generated. There won't be some one first thing which necessitates generation simply. It won't be necessary that there's always some previous act of generation, but there won't be some one thing which causes it. Moreover, neither in things which have an end will it be true to assert this, that it is simply necessary a thing should be generated. So things as in which are means to an end, or things that have a purpose beyond themselves, so they won't be simply necessary, as for instance a house when the foundation is laid. So a house serves a purpose. There's an end to a house. So things which have themselves ends won't be simply necessary. For when it is laid, unless it is always necessary that the house should be built, it will happen that what may not always be, always is. All right, footnote 8. Generation is infinite circularly, so as to return to the same thing, but it is not infinite according to a right line. For generation according to a right line cannot be necessary, neither if the things which are arranged in a right line are finite, nor if they are infinite. So there's no necessity to a right line of time, whether the line is finite or infinite. They cannot be necessary if, when arranged in a right line, they are infinite. For, in things which are thus arranged, it is necessary that before that which is posterior there should always exist that which is prior, just as it is necessary that before the house exists the foundation should be laid. But in infinites, a first cannot be given. Hence, if the things which are arranged in a right line are infinite, there cannot be a first. But a first not existing, it is impossible that any one of the rest should be assigned, and therefore it is not necessary that any one of the things posterior should be admitted. That reasoning is a little fuzzy, but alright. So if there's an infinite sequence, there's no first thing that sets it all necessarily in motion. The necessity is ex hypothesized that there is always some prior condition, but the particular nature of those prior conditions cannot be ever established because there's no one first chain of how the generation proceeds. Hence, generation will not only not be necessary, but impossible. So going back infinitely with no first thing that moves, that's impossible. But neither can generation be necessary if the things which are arranged in a right line are finite. So there's no generation if there's a finite right line of time. For a foundation and a house are arranged in a right line, since a house supposes a foundation, but a foundation does not imply the existence of a house. Hence, if those things being finite, which are arranged in a right line, generation were simply necessary, or from hypothesis, a house would necessarily be generated either simply or from the hypothesis of a foundation. We see, however, that the generation of a house, as well simply as from the supposition of a foundation, is a thing contingent. So this is an inductive proof that a finite right line of time is impossible, in that, well, here's an instance of a finite chain of causation. We see that it is contingent, therefore a finite right line does not involve necessity. Hence, that would necessarily be generated, which from experience is evidently generated contingently and not necessarily. Okay, so it's not consistent with experience. It's an inductive argument that a finite right line of time cannot have necessity. He's not saying it's impossible, but a finite right line cannot lead to necessary conditions, necessary posterior conditions. Okay. For when it is laid, unless it is always necessary that the house should be built, it will happen that what may not always be, always is. Okay, so things which have some end aren't necessary, but it is necessary to generation that it should always be, if the generation of it is from necessity. For a subsistence from necessity and the always are simultaneous, since that which necessarily is cannot possibly not be. So necessity involves perpetuity. Hence, if a thing is from necessity, it is perpetual. And if it is perpetual, it is from necessity. If generation, therefore, is from necessity, the generation of this also is perpetual, and if perpetual, it is from necessity. Hence, if there is simply a if we posit that something is in fact perpetual, then it is by definition necessary in that it cannot not be being perpetual. So ex hypothesis. Once we know that it's perpetual, we know that it's necessary. Hence, if there is simply a generation of something from necessity, it is necessary that it should be moved in a circle and revert. Okay, so a finite right line does not lead to necessity. An infinite line, A, ends up being incoherent, B, because it's a regress to infinity, basically, and B, doesn't involve necessity because there's no one particular nature of that generation. It's only infinite looking backward to everlasting, like a everlasting tower of turtles. There's no determination of the character of any posterior condition because there's no determination of the first condition. So that being said, and we have perpetuity inductively, well, I mean, we don't really know the perpetuity of the heavens. He just takes it to be from appearances evident. Recording over very long spans of time, the heavens still move how they always have, so we take it to be perpetual, basically. He is relying on induction there. But if we assume the universe to be perpetual, we assume generation, therefore, to be necessary. And if necessary, and it can't be an infinite straight line or a finite line, therefore, it is a circle. So that's how he gets to the cyclicity of time. For it is necessary that generation should either have an end or not, and if not, how much longer is this argument? Not long. Okay. For it is necessary that generation should either have an end or not, and if not, that it should either proceed in a right line or in a circle, but if these But of these, if generation will be perpetual, it is not possible it can proceed in a right line, because it would by no means have a beginning. Neither, therefore, will it be perpetual if it proceeds downwards, as we assume in things that will be hereafter, nor if it proceeds upwards, as in things which are generated. Not being finite, however, it is necessary that it should have a beginning, and that it should be perpetual. Hence, it is necessary that it should proceed in a circle. It will be necessary, therefore, that a reversion should take place. Thus, for instance, if this particular thing is from necessity, that also which was prior to it was from necessity. But if this, it is also necessary that which is posterior should be generated. And this must always and incessantly take place, for it makes no difference to assert that this is effected through two or through many things. That which is simply from necessity, therefore, is in a circular motion and generated, and if in a circle, it is necessary that everything should be generated and should have been generated. Okay, so before it said not everything is necessary, but only that in which there's a conversion between the posterior and the prior. Well, here we're saying there is a conversion between the posterior and the prior of all things, and therefore all things are necessary, apparently. And if this is necessary, the generation of these will be in a circle. Footnote 1. The necessity that generation should be circular may be briefly shown as follows, and the efficient cause also may be assigned why generations subsist circularly so as often to revert to the same thing. For it is necessary that generation either should have an end and some time or other cease, or that it should not have an end but always endure. Admitting, therefore, as has been demonstrated, that generation cannot have an end, but ought always to endure, it is necessary that it should either be in a right line, so as never to return to the same thing, or that it should be circular, so that it may infinitely return to the same thing. It has, however, been shown to be impossible that if generation is in a right line, it should be infinite either upward or downward, since if it were, neither a first thing nor a last could be given, but that which is first being taken away, all that is posterior will be taken away. Hence, it is necessary that generation should be circular, so that it may return infinitely to the same things. In this circular generation, therefore, if that which is posterior is, it is necessary that that which is prior should exist. And if that which is prior exists, it is necessary that there should be that which is posterior, and thus to infinity, so that causes the same in species may be circularly prior and posterior. Thus, if the earth is moistened by rain, it is necessary that rain should precede. If rain precedes, it is necessary that clouds should precede, and if there are clouds, it is necessary that vapors should ascend from the earth, and if vapors ascend, it is necessary that the earth should be moistened. Hence, there is now a regression to moistening which rain precedes, so that clouds may precede rain, elevated vapors may precede clouds, moistening of the earth may precede elevated vapors, and thus generation may be rendered perpetual by recurring in a perpetual circle to the same things through many or through fewer media. If therefore generation is circular, it is necessary that everything which was will also be hereafter, in something similar in species, and everything which will be had in like manner an existence before. He qualifies in species, so okay. And on the maybe there's still room then for contingent individuals. The species have to repeat. And on the contrary, if everything which was will be in something similar in species, and if everything which was and if everything which will be was in something specifically similar, it is necessary that generation should be circular. Okay. Although species, I think, can have the sense even of the specific individual, but maybe not. We'll have to watch for that qualification, that individuals might still be contingent even if the procession of species is circular. Does anyone know who discovered the cycle of precipitation? Which pre-Socratic philosopher? It was Anaximander, reportedly. Okay. Who also believed in a infinite cosmos, although probably not in a way that Aristotle would endorse. Actually, definitely not, because Anaximander had infinitely many worlds. Aristotle says one world, and it's cyclically perpetual. All right. The generation of these will be in a circle. But these things reasonably are so, since it has elsewhere appeared that the motion in a circle and the motion of the heavens are perpetual, because these are generated and will be from necessity whatever motions there are of this, and whatever subsists on account of this motion. For if that which is circularly moved always moves something, it is also necessary that the motion of those things which it moves should be circular. Thus, for instance, if the upwardlation is circular, the sun will be circularly moved, but because the sun is thus moved, on this account the seasons also will revolve in a circle and revert. And these things subsisting, all other things will be circularly moved from these. So the heavenly bodies are perpetual and move in a circle. Time is derivative from the heavenly bodies, therefore time is cyclical. Why, therefore, do some things appear to be thus generated in a circle, as for instance water and air? If there is a cloud, it is necessary there should be rain, and if it rains, it is necessary there should be a cloud. But men and animals do not revert into themselves, so as that the same man or animal is again generated. For it is not necessary, if a father is generated, that you should be generated. But if you are, it is necessary that he should be. But this generation appears to be in a right line. The beginning of the consideration is, however, again this, whether all things similarly revert or not, but some things in number and others in species alone. Oh yeah, numerically one is talking about individuals, specifically one is talking about belonging to the same species. It is evident, therefore, that those things whose essence being moved is incorruptible will be the same in number, for motion follows that which is moved. So things with an incorruptible essence have an eternal cyclical motion, or perpetual, but such things whose essence being moved is corruptible necessarily revert in species, but not in number. Hence, water is from air, and air from water, the same in species, but not in number. And even if these were the same in number, this will not be the case with those things the essence of which is generated, which is of that kind that it may not exist. And then so he adds, well, even if the elements are indestructible and the same in number, still, things which are basically generated and capable of not existing are not guaranteed to repeat numerically, but they are guaranteed to repeat specifically. That's the weakest part of this argument, I think, that individuals don't recur. Footnote 2, those things which are so circularly moved as not to be essentially corrupted return to the same thing in number, and because the celestial bodies are so circularly moved that they are not essentially changed, they return to a place numerically the same, and to motions the same in number, at least through continuation. On the contrary, those things which are so moved as to be corrupted in essence do not return to the same thing in number, but only to the same thing in species. Yes, this seems so far to just be asserted, more or less. It was kind of added on. Thus, when air is produced from water, and water again from air, water not numerically, but alone specifically the same is produced. And even if it should be admitted that the elements return numerically the same, yet animals are never generated numerically the same, but only the same in species. Yeah, it's really just tacked on as an assertion, whereas like a really consistent application of the reasoning involved might induce us to hold that individuals do eventually repeat. The world is finite, not infinite, and yet infinite permutations of a finite system repeat. It's as simple as that, but Aristotle didn't necessarily have access to that kind of reasoning. So, all right, chapter 8 next time. Let's preview what it's going to be. The reason why Aristotle says the sun heats us, though it is itself not hot, but it is hot, Also his doctrine about comets. So we'll be looking at why the sun heats not being hot and stuff about comets. So that should be fun. We still have so much of this text left. All right.